The sky above Valara Prime burned with colors that should not exist. Lyra Ven stood at the observation window of her command center, watching her world die. The crystalline towers that had stood for 12,000 years were crumbling. Each structure that fell sent waves of light across the planet's surface, like stars exploding in slow motion. She had seen the reports. Every major city was falling. The population centers that once held billions now stood empty, or worse. The thing they called the Scourge had arrived 3 weeks ago, and nothing could stop it. It moved through space like a living shadow, consuming everything in its path. When it touched a planet, the world changed. Matter itself seemed to forget what it was supposed to be. Lyra's hands shook as she reviewed the evacuation numbers. 200,000 survivors. That was all that remained of her entire civilization. 200,000 people scattered across 15 ships, running for their lives while their military fought a hopeless battle to buy them time. The communication officer called out from across the room. "Commander, the Defense Fleet reports they cannot hold much longer. Admiral Kren says we have maybe 6 hours before the Scourge breaks through." 6 hours. Lyra closed her eyes and took a breath. 6 hours to get 200,000 people to safety. But safety where? Every system within range had closed its borders. Every ally had turned away. She pulled up the star map on her display. The entire region glowed red with warnings and restricted zones. The Galactic Consensus, the great alliance of 47 species that had maintained peace for 3,000 years, had abandoned them completely. Lyra remembered the day they had called for help. She had stood in this same room and sent out the distress signal herself. The Vallani had been members of the Consensus since its founding. They had fought in the coalition wars. They had shared their technology freely. They had helped rebuild the Kreth Empire after the Great Plague. They had earned the right to ask for aid. The first response had come from the Kreth. A simple message. Request denied. Border closed. Do not approach our systems. Then the Fotari Collective, the wise philosophers who spoke of unity and brotherhood. We cannot risk our people. You understand. The Soro dynasty, who the Vallani had saved from economic collapse 2 centuries ago. One by one, every species in the Consensus had refused. Some offered sympathy. Some did not bother with explanations. The result was the same. The Vallani would face the Scourge alone. A young officer approached Lyra's station. His name was Doran, barely 30 years old, fresh from the academy before the Scourge arrived. "Commander, the civilian ships are asking for a destination. They want to know where we are going." Lyra looked at the star map again. There was nowhere to go. Every system that could support Vallani life was either too far away or had denied them entry. They were flying into empty space, hoping to find some miracle before their supplies ran out. "Tell them we are heading toward the outer sectors," she said quietly. "Tell them we will find somewhere safe." It was a lie, but it was a kind one. The people on those ships had lost everything. They did not need to know that their commander had no plan, no hope, no answer to give them. The hours crawled past. Lyra watched the tactical display as the defense fleet fell back, ship by ship. Each vessel that died bought them minutes. Admiral Kren himself commanded the last line of defense, his flagship holding position even as the Scourge closed around it. His final transmission was brief. "Crystalline Hope, this is Admiral Kren. We have given you all the time we can. Take care of our people, Commander. Make sure they remember us." Then his ship was gone, consumed by the darkness that spread across the sensors like ink in water. The civilian convoy jumped to faster than light speed, leaving their dying world behind. Lyra stood alone on the bridge, staring at the empty space where Valara Prime had been. Somewhere behind them, the Scourge continued its work, erasing the last traces of Vallani civilization from the galaxy. The ship's sensors showed the convoy formation. 15 vessels, packed with refugees, old transport ships, pleasure cruisers, cargo haulers, anything that could carry people and move fast enough to run. Most were not built for long journeys. They would need to stop for supplies within a week. Lyra began composing another message to the consensus. Perhaps if she explained the situation again, if she begged, if she offered something in return. But she knew it was useless. The consensus had made its decision. In the cold calculation of galactic politics, the Villani were already dead. No one would risk their own people to save ghosts. The communication officer spoke again. Commander, I am picking up something strange. There are ships approaching from the direction of the outer rim. Lyra felt her stomach tighten. Pirates, probably. Or scavengers coming to pick through the remains. How many? Why? 6 ships. They are small. Much smaller than consensus standard vessels. Their design is unusual. I do not recognize the configuration. Are they armed? Yes, but not heavily. Commander, they are hailing us. Lyra straightened in her chair. Put it through. The view screen flickered to life. A human face appeared. Lyra had seen images of humans before. The species was new to the galaxy. Barely 80 years since first contact. They were not members of the consensus, considered too primitive and too far from the core systems to matter much. The human wore a dark blue uniform. His face showed the lines of someone who had seen difficult things. When he spoke, the translation system rendered his words in Villani. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth Alliance vessel Defiant Dawn. We received your distress calls. We know what happened to your world. We know the consensus turned you away. He paused, and something like anger crossed his face. That should never have happened. No one should be left to die alone. Lyra could not speak. She stared at the human captain, trying to understand what she was hearing. Jake Morrison continued. We are not a large force. We are not as advanced as the consensus species. But we are here, and we are not leaving. The scourge is 6 hours behind you. We are going to buy you more time. We are going to get you somewhere safe. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on the camera. You are not abandoned anymore. Help has arrived. The transmission ended. Lyra sat frozen in her chair. Around her, the bridge crew stared at their stations in shock. Someone had come. Someone had actually come to help them. The small human fleet moved into formation around the Villani convoy, their ships taking up defensive positions. They were so tiny compared to consensus vessels. Their weapons outdated. Their armor, thin. They had no chance against the scourge, but they had come anyway. Lyra felt something break inside her chest. For 3 weeks, she had held herself together through the death of her world, the loss of billions, the cold rejection of every ally they had ever trusted. She had been strong because her people needed her to be strong. Now, finally, someone had answered their call. Not the mighty empires of the consensus, not the ancient civilizations with their vast fleets, but these young humans from the edge of the galaxy, who owed the Villani nothing, who had every reason to protect themselves and ignore the desperate plea of a dying race. They had come to help. Jake Morrison had not slept in 36 hours. The bridge of the Defiant Dawn hummed with quiet activity as his crew prepared for what might be their last battle. He sat in his command chair, reviewing the tactical data for the 100th time, looking for something he had missed, some advantage they could use. There was nothing. The scourge was bigger, faster, and more powerful than anything in Earth's database. His 6 ships were survey vessels and light escorts, never meant for combat against something like this. By every reasonable measure, they should run. They should protect themselves and let the Villani face their fate alone. Jake looked at the refugee convoy on his display. 15 ships filled with families, children, the last remnants of an entire civilization. He thought about his own daughter back on Earth, about what he would want someone to do if she needed help, and he could not reach her. The choice had never really been a choice at all. His first officer, Nina Wells, stood beside his chair. She was young for her rank, barely 28, but she had proven herself in every crisis they had faced. Captain, we are receiving requests for clarification from the crew. They want to know if we are really doing this. What did you tell them? I told them to trust your judgment. But Jake, they deserve to know the odds. He nodded slowly. Call an all-hands meeting. Everyone. Not on essential duty. Patch them through. 5 minutes later, the faces of his crew filled the communication screens around the bridge. Engineers, pilots, medical staff, scientists, 240 people who had signed up to explore the galaxy, not to die fighting an impossible enemy. Jake stood and faced the cameras. You all know the situation. The Villani are running from something that destroyed their entire civilization. The galactic consensus abandoned them. Every species with the power to help decided it was too dangerous, too costly, not their problem. He paused. They were wrong. He pulled up an image of the refugee convoy. There are 200,000 people on those ships. Most of them are civilians. There are families, children, elderly. They did nothing to deserve what happened to their world. They asked for help from their allies, and their allies turned away. Someone in engineering spoke up. Captain, with respect, they are not our allies either. Earth is not part of the consensus. We do not owe them anything. You are right, Jake said. We do not owe them anything. This is not about debt or obligation. This is about what kind of people we want to be. He looked directly at the camera. Humanity has always been at its best when we helped those who could not help themselves. Throughout our history, ordinary people risked everything to protect strangers, not because they had to, but because it was right. Nina stepped forward. The Scourge will be here in less than 6 hours. If we engage, we will probably lose ships. We will probably lose people. Some of us might not make it home. The bridge fell silent. Jake could see the fear on the faces around him, but he could also see something else. Determination. The same stubborn refusal to abandon someone in need that had defined humanity since the beginning. A voice came from the engine room. It was Carlos Hayes, the chief engineer. Captain, I have a wife and 2 kids back home. I think about them every day. He cleared his throat. But I also think about what I would tell them if I came home having left innocent people to die because it was safer for me. I could not look them in the eye. I could not teach them to be good people if I was not one myself. Others began speaking up. A pilot from the fighter squadron. A medical officer. A young technician on her first deep space mission. One by one, they made their choice. Not because they were ordered, but because they understood what was at stake. Jake felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Thank you. All of you. Now let us get to work. We have 6 hours to figure out how to fight something we do not understand. Nina, I want every tactical officer working on battle plans. Carlos, push the engines as hard as you can. Medical teams, prepare for casualties. Everyone else, help where you are needed. The crew scattered to their stations. Jake turned to Nina. Do you think we can actually do this? I think we can try, she said quietly. And sometimes, that is enough. The next hours passed in a blur of preparation. The human ships moved into defensive formation around the Villani convoy. Jake opened a direct channel to Commander Lyra Venn on the Crystalline Hope. Her face appeared on his screen. She looked exhausted, her eyes carrying the weight of unimaginable loss. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. Captain Morrison, I do not know how to thank you for what you are doing. You do not need to thank us, Commander. We are just doing what anyone should do. He pulled up a tactical map. My officers have been studying the data from your battles with the Scourge. We have some ideas that might help us buy more time. Lyra leaned forward. What kind of ideas? The Scourge moves like it is one entity, but your reports suggest it might be made of smaller parts working together. If we can confuse its coordination, make it harder for those parts to communicate, we might be able to slow it down. The consensus tried electromagnetic interference. It did not work. Jake smiled. We are not planning to use consensus tactics. We are going to use Earth tactics. Old strategies that no one in the galaxy has seen before. He highlighted several points on the map. We cannot destroy it, but we can make it chase us. We can hit and run, use our smaller size to our advantage. Every minute we keep it busy is another minute your people get farther away. Lyra studied the tactical plan. Captain, this is suicide. Your ships will be destroyed. Maybe, but maybe not. Humans are good at surviving things we should not survive. We are stubborn that way. He met her eyes. Commander, how long do your ships need to reach a safe location? At maximum speed, 17 hours to reach the outer edge of the sector, where we might find a place to hide. Then we will give you 17 hours. That is impossible. Probably, Jake agreed. But we are going to try anyway. The scourge appeared on their sensors exactly 6 hours after the human ships had arrived. It was massive. A dark cloud that seemed to absorb light itself. The sensors could barely make sense of it, showing readings that changed from moment to moment. Jake watched it approach on the tactical display. All ships, this is Morrison. Remember the plan. Hit fast, move faster. Do not try to be heroes. Our job is to be annoying, not dead. Good luck to all of you. The human fleet split into 3 groups. The Defiant Dawn led one group forward, launching sensor decoys that mimicked the energy signature of the Villani convoy. The Scourge shifted direction slightly, following the false trail. It is working, Nina reported. The Scourge is tracking the decoys. How long before it realizes the trick? Unknown. Could be minutes. Could be an hour. Jake nodded. Then we make the most of it. All ships. Begin attack pattern Alpha. The human ships opened fire, their weapons striking at the edge of the Scourge. The effect was minimal, like throwing stones at a mountain. But it got the entity's attention. Part of the darkness broke away from the main mass and flowed toward them. Here it comes, Jake said calmly. Break formation and scatter. Make it work for every kill. The Defiant Dawn spun away from the approaching tendril of darkness, its engines screaming at maximum power. Behind them, the other ships split in different directions, each one pulling pieces of the Scourge away from the refugee convoy. On the crystalline Hope, Lyra watched the battle unfold on her sensors. The human ships danced through space, too small and too fast for the Scourge to catch easily. Every time the entity got close, they would change direction, launch more decoys, fire their weapons to draw attention away from their companions. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. These humans were giving everything they had to protect people they had never met, fighting an enemy they could not defeat, buying time with their lives. One of the human ships was not fast enough. The destroyer Morning Light took damage to its engines and began to fall behind. Lyra watched in horror as the Scourge closed in around it. The captain of the Morning Light sent one last transmission. Convoy, this is Captain Brooks. Get our friends to safety. Earth remembers its heroes. Make sure the Villani remember us too. The ship exploded, taking a piece of the Scourge with it. The blast bought the other human ships precious seconds to escape. Jake felt the loss like a physical blow. 30 people had just died. 30 people with families, dreams, futures. Gone in an instant because they chose to help strangers. But there was no time to mourn. The Scourge was still coming, and they still had 16 hours to go. The battle had been going for 9 hours. Jake's eyes burned from staring at tactical displays, his throat raw from giving orders. The Defiant Dawn shook as another blast from the Scourge came too close, overloading the shields for a moment before they recharged. Damage report, he called out. Hull integrity at 60%, Nina answered, her voice tight with stress. Portside weapons offline. Engines running at 120% capacity. Carlos says he can keep it up for maybe another hour before something critical fails. Jake looked at the convoy position. They had made it 12 hours, 5 more to go. But his small fleet was falling apart. They had started with 6 ships. Now they had 4. The Morning Light was gone. The carrier Distant Horizon had sacrificed itself 3 hours ago, when a tendril of the scourge broke through toward the civilian ships. He would never forget watching that carrier dive straight into the darkness, its captain screaming defiance until the very end. The explosion had been massive, scattering the scourge and giving the convoy time to jump ahead. But the scourge was learning. It adapted to their tactics, anticipated their moves. What had worked in the first hour stopped working by the third. The humans had to keep changing, keep improvising, stay one step ahead of an enemy that grew smarter with every engagement. A communication came through from one of the other ships. Lieutenant Ryan Cooper was leading the fighter squadron. 12 small craft that darted around the scourge like insects around a giant. "Captain, we have a problem. The scourge is splitting into multiple sections. It is trying to surround us." Jake pulled up the sensor data. Ryan was right. The entity had divided into 3 large masses, each one moving to cut off their escape routes. If they got caught between them, the battle would be over. All ships, fall back to Rally Point Gamma. Ryan, I need your fighters to harass the southern mass. Keep it busy while we regroup. Trom. Understood, Captain. We will give them hell. The fighters broke away from the main battle, their weapons firing in coordinated bursts. The Scourge's southern section turned to follow them, just as Jake had hoped. It gave the larger ships room to pull back and reposition, but one of the fighters took a direct hit. Jake watched the pilot eject, his emergency beacon activating. There was no time for rescue. The pilot would drift in space until his oxygen ran out, or the Scourge found him. Ryan's voice came through the channel, thick with emotion. "Captain." That was Danny Kim. He was 23 years old. He joined up because he wanted to see the stars. "I know, Ryan. I know." Jake felt the weight of every life he was responsible for. Keep your people moving. Do not let his sacrifice be wasted. The hours crawled past. The human ships were barely holding together. The Defiant Dawn's bridge was filled with smoke from burned-out systems. Half the crew was injured. Carlos had performed miracles keeping the engines running. But even miracles had limits. Nina collapsed into her chair, exhausted. "Jake, we are not going to make it. Even if we survive the next 5 hours, we do not have enough fuel to get back to human space. We are going to be stranded out here." "Odo, I know," he said quietly. "But the Villani will be safe. That is what matters." She looked at him, tears in her eyes. Was it worth it? Dying for people we do not even know? Jake thought about his daughter. He thought about every story of heroism and sacrifice he had ever heard. Every person throughout human history who had given everything for a stranger. Yes, it was worth it. Because if we do not help when we can, then what is the point of anything? We might as well be machines. An alarm blared across the bridge. The sensors showed something new. More ships were approaching from human space. Dozens of them. Civilian transports, cargo haulers, colony ships. Every human vessel within range was arriving, answering the call Jake had sent out hours ago. The communication channels lit up with transmissions. "This is the Transport Evening Star. We heard you needed help, Captain Morrison. We are here. Cargo ship Big Sky reporting. We brought supplies and medical equipment. Where do you need us? Colony ship New Horizon standing by. We have room for refugees if needed." Jake felt his chest tighten. He had not expected this. He had sent out a general call for any military vessels in the area. But these were civilians. Families, traders, colonists. People with no training for combat, no weapons, no armor. But they had come anyway. The fleet captain of the civilian convoy contacted him directly. Her name was Lisa Martinez, and she commanded a colony ship carrying 5,000 settlers to a new world. "Captain Morrison, we know you told us to stay away if we were not military. But we talked it over. All of us. We decided that if you are willing to die for strangers, we can at least help you try to live. Governor Martinez, this is a combat zone. You will be in terrible danger. We know. But you taught us something important. Captain, you showed us that humanity means helping people, even when it is hard, even when it is dangerous. We are not going to let you die alone out here. The civilian fleet moved into position around the convoy. They had no weapons, but they had other things. Medical ships began treating wounded crew from the damaged warships. Supply vessels transferred fuel and ammunition. The colony ships offered to take Villani refugees if the military vessels needed to be lighter and faster. Lyra watched from the crystalline hope as the human fleet grew from a handful of desperate warriors to a full armada of helpers. She had never seen anything like it. In consensus space, civilians stayed far away from danger. They expected the military to protect them, not the other way around. But these humans were different. They did not see a separation between soldier and civilian, between helper and helped. They saw people in need, and they came together to meet that need. She opened a channel to Jake. Captain Morrison, what your people are doing is beyond anything I have ever witnessed. You are all risking everything for us. Jake smiled, tired but genuine. Commander, this is just what humans do. We take care of each other. And right now, you are one of us. The final 3 hours of the journey were the hardest. The scourge threw everything it had at them, as if it knew its prey was about to escape. The human military ships, battered and broken, formed a wall between the darkness and the convoy. Behind them, the civilian fleet kept everyone supplied, kept everyone moving. 2 more ships were lost. The destroyer Skyward fell, defending a group of civilian transports. The escort vessel Ranger stayed behind to cover the retreat, buying minutes with the lives of its crew. But the convoy kept moving. Every human ship that could still fly pushed forward, carrying the Villani towards safety. Finally, after 17 hours of running and fighting, they crossed into the outer edge of the sector. The scourge slowed at the boundary, as if it had reached the limit of its current expansion. It would come eventually, but not today. Jake slumped in his command chair, barely able to believe they had made it. Around him, his bridge crew sat in exhausted silence. They had lost 40% of their military ships. Hundreds of humans had died. But 200,000 Villani had survived. Nina put a hand on his shoulder. We did it, Captain. Against all odds, we actually did it. He nodded, too tired for words. On the view screen, he could see the Villani convoy. All 15 ships intact and safe. It had been worth it. Every sacrifice, every loss, every moment of terror. They had saved an entire civilization. Lisa Martinez contacted him from the New Horizon. Captain, our colony world is 3 days from here. It is called New Haven. It is not much, still being terraformed, but we have room. We would be honored to offer shelter to the Villani people. Jake looked at Lyra's face on another screen. She was crying, overwhelmed by the generosity of these strangers who had given so much already. Commander Venn, what do you say? Would New Haven work as a temporary home for your people? Lyra could barely speak. Captain Morrison, Governor Martinez, you have already done so much. We cannot ask for more. You are not asking, Lisa said firmly. We are offering. No one should be homeless. No one should be afraid. Come to New Haven. Stay as long as you need. Build a new life. You are welcome. The Villani convoy changed course toward New Haven. The human fleet, military and civilian together, escorted them every step of the way. In the darkness behind them, the scourge waited, but it had not won. It had destroyed a world, but it had not destroyed hope, because humanity had shown up when no one else would, and that had made all the difference. New Haven was not beautiful. The sky was a pale orange color, filtered through atmospheric processors that were still working to make the air breathable. The landscape was rocky and bare, with only patches of engineered grass struggling to take root. The cities were small collections of prefabricated buildings, functional but plain. To the Villani refugees stepping off their ships for the first time, it was paradise. Lyra walked down the ramp of the crystalline hope, feeling real ground under her feet for the first time in weeks. Around her, thousands of her people emerged from the convoy ships, blinking in the strange sunlight, breathing air that tasted different but clean. Governor Lisa Martinez was there to meet them. She had arrived ahead of the convoy to prepare the colony for its new residents. Behind her stood hundreds of human colonists, holding signs of welcome in both English and hastily learned Villani script. "Commander Ven," Lisa said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Welcome to New Haven. I know it is not much compared to what you lost, but it is yours for as long as you need it." Lyra took the offered hand, still learning human customs. "Governor Martinez, you have given us more than shelter. You have given us hope. We will never forget this kindness." Lisa smiled. "Come on. Let me show you what we have prepared." Owl, the human colonists had worked around the clock to make room for 200,000 refugees. They had converted warehouses into temporary housing. They had set up medical centers staffed with human doctors learning Villani physiology from transmitted data. They had even tried to prepare food that Villani could eat, though the first attempts had been unsuccessful. But what struck Lyra most was not the facilities. It was the attitude. Everywhere she looked, humans were helping. Families had opened their small homes to Villani strangers. Engineers were adapting human technology to work with Villani needs. Teachers were learning the Villani language so they could communicate with refugee children. No one complained about the burden. No one asked what they would get in return. They just helped, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Jake Morrison had taken leave from his military duties to coordinate the integration effort. Lyra found herself working with him daily, planning logistics, solving problems, learning about these strange humans who had saved her people. They sat in a small office one evening, reviewing supply reports. The colony was stretching its resources thin to support the refugees, but no one talked about rationing or limits. "Captain Morrison," Lyra said carefully, "I need to understand something. Why are your people doing this? The rescue, the shelter, the sharing of resources. You get nothing from it. We cannot pay you back. We have no technology you need, no resources to trade, yet you give and give." Jake leaned back in his chair. "Do you know what my daughter asked me before I left Earth for this mission? She asked why I had to go, why I had to leave her to help people she would never meet." "What did you tell her?" "I told her about a man named Martin Niemöller. He lived on Earth hundreds of years ago. He wrote a poem about people who did nothing while others suffered. The poem ends with a line, 'Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me.'" Jake looked at Lyra. "I told my daughter that we help others because someday we might need help too. And when that day comes, I want to live in a galaxy where people actually show up." Lyra felt tears in her eyes. "The consensus did not show up for us. I know. And that was wrong. But humans, we have a different way of thinking about this. We have a word in one of our old languages, Ubuntu. It means, I am, because we are. My humanity is tied to yours. When you suffer, I suffer. When you are in danger, I am diminished." He paused. "Maybe that makes us weak by consensus standards. Maybe it is not practical or strategic, but it is who we are." Over the following weeks, the integration continued. The Villani refugees began to settle into their new reality. Children started attending human schools, playing with human kids during breaks. Scientists from both species began collaborating on research projects. Artists created works that blended Villani crystalline techniques with human painting and sculpture. There were challenges. Cultural misunderstandings happened daily. The Villani were used to a more formal society, with strict hierarchies and protocols. The humans were casual and direct, sometimes to the point of rudeness by Villani standards. But both sides worked to adapt, to learn, to understand. One day, a group of Villani scientists approached Dr. Helen Foster, the xenobiologist who had argued for the rescue mission. They had been studying the data from the battle with the Scourge, looking at the sensor readings from when the human weapons had briefly disrupted the entity. The lead scientist, an older Villani named Corin, presented their findings. Dr. Foster, we believe we have found something important. When your ships fired on the Scourge, there was a moment where its cohesion weakened. The effect was tiny, but it was there. Manning, Helen leaned forward. We noticed that too, but we could not figure out why. Our weapons should not have been powerful enough to affect it. It was not the power. It was the frequency. Your weapons operate on a different energy spectrum than consensus technology. The Scourge had adapted to defend against consensus weapons, but it had never encountered human designs before. Corin pulled up a holographic display. If we could isolate that frequency and amplify it, we might be able to create a weapon that actually hurts the Scourge. Helen felt her heart race. Are you saying we could fight back? Actually, fight back? We are saying there might be hope. But we would need to work together. Villani, knowledge of energy manipulation, combined with human innovation in weapon design. The research began immediately. Teams of human and Villani scientists worked around the clock, building on each other's strengths. The Villani understood the theoretical physics at a level humans were still learning. The humans brought creative problem-solving and a willingness to try unconventional approaches. 3 months after the evacuation, they had a prototype. It was crude, built from salvaged parts and improvised components. But when they tested it on a small sample of Scourge material, the results were unmistakable. The weapon worked. Word spread quickly. Within days, representatives from consensus species began arriving at New Haven. The same civilizations that had refused to help the Villani now wanted access to the research. They came with offers of trade, technology, resources, anything to get the weapon design. The Kreeth Empire sent an ambassador. The Fotari Collective dispatched their High Council. The Soro dynasty transmitted requests for immediate collaboration, all of them suddenly very concerned about the Scourge, now that there was a way to fight it. Lyra stood in the colony's council chamber, looking at the representatives from species that had abandoned her people. Jake stood beside her, along with Lisa Martinez and Dr. Foster. The consensus diplomats sat in chairs designed for species much larger than humans, looking uncomfortable in the simple room. The Kreeth ambassador spoke first. Commander Ven, we understand that you and the humans have developed a weapon against the Scourge. This is a matter of galactic security. We must have access to this technology immediately. Lyra kept her voice level. You must have access. Interesting choice of words, Ambassador. Where was this concern for galactic security when my people called for help? Where was your sense of duty when we were dying? The ambassador shifted uncomfortably. The situation was complicated. We had our own populations to consider. As did we, Lyra said coldly. But that did not stop these humans from risking their lives to save us. It did not stop them from opening their homes and sharing their resources. They owed us nothing. Yet they gave us everything. Lisa stepped forward. The weapon research will be shared freely with anyone who will use it to protect others. We will not sell it, or trade it, or use it as leverage. But there are conditions. The Fotari representative leaned forward. What conditions? You will never again abandon a species in need, Jake said firmly. You will reform the consensus into something that actually stands for mutual aid, not just mutual interest. You will prove that you learned something from your failure. The room fell silent. The consensus representatives looked at each other, clearly uncomfortable with being lectured by species they considered inferior. Finally, the Soro diplomat spoke. You are asking us to change thousands of years of policy and tradition. Yes, Helen said. We are. Because your old ways led to the death of billions, and would have led to billions more. The Scourge is still out there, growing stronger. Next time, it might be your world. And when you call for help, You better hope someone answers. The meeting ended with no agreement. But Lyra knew the seed had been planted. The consensus could not ignore what had happened. Humanity had shown that there was another way. A better way. The consensus, SS. We had had about. Rever 1. We had had a one. That evening, Lyra walked through the streets of New Haven. She saw Villani children playing with human children, neither group caring about the differences between them. She saw families from both species sharing meals, teaching each other recipes and traditions. She saw hope, real and growing. Jake found her watching the sunset, the orange sky turning purple as night approached. Yes, Lyra agreed. Captain Morrison, I want you to know that what your people did, it changed everything. Not just for the Villani, but for the entire galaxy. You showed us what we should have been all along. Jake smiled. We just did what felt right. The real question is what comes next. The scourge is still out there. Other species might face what you faced. We need to be ready. We will be ready, Lyra said with certainty. Together, the weapon changed everything. Within 6 months of its development, the technology had spread across the galaxy. Species that had cowered before the scourge now had a way to fight back. Worlds that had been evacuated were reclaimed. The entity was not destroyed, but it was contained, pushed back, fragmented into smaller pieces that could be managed. But the real change was not in the weapon itself. It was in what the weapon represented. The galactic consensus fell apart. Not violently, but inevitably. Like a structure with a cracked foundation finally giving way. Species after species withdrew, unwilling to be part of an organization that had failed so completely when tested. Some formed new alliances based on mutual defense. Others went their own way. From the ashes of the old consensus, something new began to grow. It started with a treaty signed on New Haven between Earth and the Villani people. The document was simple, written in both languages on a single page. It promised mutual aid, honest cooperation, and a commitment to help others in need. Other species began to join. Not the old powers. At first, they were too proud, too set in their ways. But younger civilizations, smaller species that had also felt the cold shoulder of consensus politics. They saw what humanity had done and wanted to be part of something better. The organization that formed was called the Coalition of Free Worlds. It had no supreme leader, no rigid hierarchy. It was a network of species who agreed on basic principles. Help those in need, share knowledge freely, stand together against threats, never abandon an ally. Lyra Venn became the first ambassador from the Villani people to the coalition. She traveled across the galaxy, telling the story of how humanity had saved her people, showing others that compassion and strength were not opposites. Jake Morrison, promoted to admiral, commanded the first joint human Villani fleet. Their mission was simple: respond to distress calls, protect refugees, face dangers together. The fleet was small compared to the old consensus armadas, but it was effective. And it was always there when needed. 1 year after the evacuation, a memorial was built on New Haven. It was designed by both human and Villani artists, a structure that combined crystalline Villani architecture with human stone working. At its center was a wall with names carved into black stone, every human who had died saving the Villani people. The dedication ceremony drew thousands. Families of the fallen came from Earth. Villani refugees came to honor those who had saved them. Representatives from across the coalition came to pay respects. Lyra stood before the memorial, reading the names. 372 humans had died in the rescue and the battle that followed. 372 people who would never go home, never see their families again, never live the lives they should have lived. She found the name of Captain Brooks, who had commanded the Morning Light. Below his name was a quote he had transmitted before his ship was destroyed. Earth remembers its heroes. Jake stood beside her in his dress uniform, along with Nina Wells and Carlos Hayes. They were the survivors, the ones who had made it through. But Lyra knew they carried the weight of every name on that wall. They should have lived, she said quietly. They should have gone home. Yes, Jake agreed. But they made a choice. They knew the risks, and they chose to help anyway. That choice saved 200,000 lives. It changed the galaxy. Their deaths meant something. The ceremony began. Lisa Martinez spoke about sacrifice and hope. Dr. Helen Foster talked about the power of compassion. Young Villani children read poems they had written, honoring the strangers who had saved them. Then Lyra stepped up to speak. She looked out at the crowd, seeing humans and Villani standing together, seeing representatives from a dozen species who had joined the coalition, seeing the future they were building together. 1 year ago, my people faced the end of everything, she began. Our world was dying. Our allies had abandoned us. We were alone in the darkness, with nowhere to run and no one to turn to. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Then humanity arrived. They were small, young, not powerful by galactic standards. By all logic, they should have protected themselves and let us face our fate. No one would have blamed them. No one would have even known, but they came anyway. They fought an enemy they could not defeat. They gave their lives for people they had never met. And when the battle was over, they opened their homes and shared what little they had. Lyra's voice grew stronger. The old consensus taught us that survival meant protecting yourself first, that compassion was a weakness in a harsh galaxy. They were wrong. Humanity showed us that compassion is the greatest strength, that helping others makes us stronger, not weaker, that we are all connected, and when one falls, we all fall. She gestured to the memorial wall. These names represent more than brave individuals. They represent a choice, a way of being that the galaxy had forgotten. They remind us that we can be better, that we should be better. Today, we honor their sacrifice. But more than that, we make a promise. We promise to carry forward what they taught us. We promise to never turn away from those in need. We promise to build a galaxy where no one is abandoned, where no one faces the darkness alone. The crowd stood in silence. Then, slowly, people began lighting memorial flames, small candles that they placed around the monument. Humans and Villani, side by side, creating a field of light that grew brighter as more joined. By sunset, thousands of flames surrounded the memorial, each one representing a life saved, a connection made, a future built on the foundation of sacrifice and hope. In the months that followed, the coalition grew stronger. More species joined, attracted by the promise of genuine mutual aid. The old consensus powers watched nervously as their former subordinates and client species flocked to this new organization that treated everyone as equals. Some of the old powers began to change. The Kreth Empire sent a formal apology to the Villani people, along with resources to help rebuild. The Fotari Collective established new protocols for emergency response that could not be ignored or bypassed. The Soro dynasty opened their borders to refugees from scourge-affected regions. It was not enough, not yet. Trust took time to rebuild, but it was a start. The scourge remained a threat, but it was no longer unstoppable. Coalition fleets patrolled the affected regions, evacuating civilians before the entity arrived, fighting it with the new weapons when necessary. The entity still destroyed worlds, but now those worlds were empty. Their populations saved and relocated. On New Haven, the integration of human and Villani cultures continued. The first generation of children born on the colony would grow up knowing both species as family. They would learn both languages, both histories, both ways of thinking. They would be something new, the bridge between two civilizations that had chosen to become one. Lyra visited Earth for the first time 2 years after the rescue. She stood in the human capital, addressing their world government, telling the story of how a few brave humans had changed the course of galactic history. She met Jake's daughter, a bright young girl who asked why her father had left her to help strangers. Lyra knelt down and looked into her eyes. Your father left because he knew that helping others was the right thing to do, even when it was hard. He saved my people. He saved my niece, who is about your age. Because of him, she gets to grow up, to learn, to dream. That is the gift he gave us. The girl thought about this. Did he save everyone? No, Lyra said honestly. Some people died, but he saved everyone he could, and he showed the whole galaxy what humanity means. He showed us how to be better. Jake, watching the conversation, felt the weight of the past 2 years. The nightmares still came sometimes, dreams of ships exploding, of crew members dying, of the impossible choices he had made. But when he saw the Villani thriving on New Haven, when he saw the coalition growing and spreading the values of mutual aid, when he saw his daughter growing up in a galaxy that was learning to care, he knew it had been worth it. The memorial on New Haven became a place of pilgrimage. People from across the galaxy came to see the names on the wall, to understand what had happened there, to learn the lesson humanity had taught. That lesson was simple but profound. When someone calls for help, you answer. Not because you expect something in return, not because it is strategic, not because you owe them. You answer because it is right. Because compassion is not weakness. Because we are all connected, in ways that matter more than borders, or species, or politics. The galaxy was learning, slowly, sometimes painfully, but learning. And at the center of that lesson stood humanity. The young species that had risked everything for strangers, that had shown an ancient and cynical galaxy how to hope again. Lyra stood one evening on a hill overlooking New Haven, watching the city lights spread across the landscape. The colony had grown. New buildings rose every month. The population was approaching 500,000, human and Villani mixed together, building something new. Jake joined her, as he often did when he visited. They had become close friends over the years, bound by shared experience and mutual respect. Do you think it will last? She asked. This new way of doing things? The coalition? The promise we made? Jake considered the question. I think it will last as long as we remember why it matters. As long as we tell the story of what happened here, of what was lost and what was saved. As long as we teach our children that helping others is not a burden, but a privilege. The old consensus is trying to reform itself, Lyra mentioned. They want to join the coalition, to be part of this new galaxy. What do you think we should do? I think we should let them try. Everyone deserves a chance to be better, but they need to prove they learned from their mistakes. They need to show that they understand what you taught us. Jake smiled. What I taught you? I just did what any decent person would do. Exactly, Lyra said. And that is the lesson. Decency, compassion, the willingness to help even when it costs you. Those are not human traits. They are universal values that the galaxy had forgotten. You reminded us. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over a world that represented hope, sacrifice, and the possibility of change. Somewhere in the darkness, the scourge still lurked. Somewhere in the galaxy, other threats waited. But this time, when the call for help came, someone would answer, because humanity had shown the way, and the galaxy was finally learning to follow.